Hello, everyone. Welcome to Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality in order to demystify spirituality. Today we have Dr. J. Dunn, and she's a naturopathic health practitioner who talks a lot about gene expression and epigenetics. And today we're just here to talk about that and what that has to do possibly with trauma. How are you doing today, Dr. Dunn?
Good. It's not done actually, but it's nice to connect with you, Dexter. We've been chatting back and forth on email. It's nice to see your face.
Yeah, thank you. And nice to see you as well. We were chatting before just kind of about what what your practices are. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm trained as a chiropractic physician, but also have training in functional medicine. And I practiced for over 35 years doing natural medicine of various kinds, and including emotional work and spiritual work and nutrition and body work, of course. But sort of ventured off into this genetics and biochemistry, which I never thought I would do because chemistry was never a strong suit of mine. But I have fallen madly in love with it because it really explains a lot about the body, about chronic diseases, and as you and I have talked about, mental health status and trauma as well. So there's a lot of ground here for you and I to talk, but I think we kind of wanted to focus on like mental health and genetics and biochemistry. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So interestingly, my degree is actually in biochemistry.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome. So you'll get this. You'll get this.
And
Sure.
it's funny because I felt the same way getting into, I've been working in the health field for over 13 years as a medical technologist. And I just decided biochemistry was really interesting. So what about epigenetics how does epigenetics play into mental health?
That's a really excellent question because this is how it really started. I really suffered my entire life with moderate to severe depression. And I had tried all kinds of things to really kind of get on top of it, including like spiritual work and emotional work and nutrition and changing my diet. And like I have a lot of tools in my bag and I've fixed a lot of people, but I couldn't ever seem to get on top of my own mental health issues and depression. And I hid it well. And I think a lot of people do. We just muddle through the best we can and we think it's our fault. And there's a lot of shame and blame that goes along with that kind of thing. But so after practicing for it was about 32 years at that point, I started to realize there was something missing in the overall picture of health for people. Some clues, including my own depression and my own struggles with not just depression, but chronic fatigue. And then looking at certain patients that didn't respond to anything we did, not like I couldn't move the needle with all these tools I had in my tool bag. And then another kind of clue that came along, and this, you may relate to this or your listeners may relate to it, but my dad died of lung cancer at 55, which was not a big secret. He did everything he could to get lung cancer and it worked. But he smoked and drank and never exercised and didn't do anything healthy. And his best friend did the same things. He ended up marrying my mom after my dad died, and he lived another 30 years doing those same things. And the only thing we can say is genetics, right? It's got to be genetics. And so I kept thinking there's something missing in the overall health picture. And I started looking into something called methylation, which you probably know that word since you're into biochemistry. But our mental health depends on how well our genes can make neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. And so it turned out, as I got my genes tested and started looking at certain genetic variants, that I had inherited a genetic variant called the vitamin D receptor. And it's how vitamin D kind of gets in and has an effect on the body. Little did I know that without being able to absorb vitamin D, I can't make serotonin and dopamine. And so once I figured that out, that was the first piece. It's like, oh, well, okay, it's not me. I'm not making it up. There's an actual cause for my mental health kind of status. And then I started to think, well, okay, sucks to be me, or can we do something about it? And I started exploring and looking into how do we make up for that, genetic variant and found certain cofactors that will upregulate the function of that receptor. So if vitamin D is trying to get in and it can't because that receptor is closed, if we take the cofactors, it'll open up, D can get in, and then we found the cofactors. So they're nutrients. They're just basic nutrients. And once I started taking those nutrients, bam, my brain turned on. And like instantly, the depression was gone. And I'm like, I think this is happy. I've heard about it.
Hmm.
And with all the spiritual work I'd done, with all the emotional work I'd done, nothing moved the needle like this did. And I went, oh my gosh, I feel so different. And my chronic fatigue was gone within a couple of weeks because upregulating your vitamin D absorption and consumption actually increases the effectiveness of your immune system to fight off infections. So that the Epstein-Barr virus that I've been fighting for 40 some years, gone. And so it got my attention. I was like, oh my gosh, if this had such a profound effect on my brain chemistry, what else can we work with? And so I started to look at certain genetic variants in, the biochemical pathways of brain chemistry first, with anxiety, with OCD, with ADD and PTSD, and all the brain chemistry kind of issues that we struggle with. And it's such an epidemic, right, of people that suffer. And I know that's what you're about, is you're trying to get them to be more spiritual and more mindful, and helping them heal. One of the things that I found, though, is if you get their biochemistry balanced, it happens a lot faster. And it's what I call biochemical nirvana. And I think, you and I talked about that before.
Wow, that's one very fascinating, and 100% I agree with you. I remember when I was going through mental health issues and I had a lot of depression and anxiety, my psychologist wanted to put me onto different type of drugs, medications, and I was very much against it. But I did jump on some. I actually tried Xanax at one point. I think I was probably like 19 or 18 at the time. And it didn't particularly work for me. But then I start to realize that maybe if I clean my diet up a little bit, start exercising, and I did start doing some of the spiritual practices, maybe that would help. But I did find that my serotonin levels were relatively low, and I
Right.
trying to find ways to bring that up naturally. So when you talk about helping people edit some of their hormones and various enzymes that might be either high or low in their body, how do you do that through gene expression? So I'm sure that they come in, get their gene analyzed and tested, and if
Right.
that's something that you all might be interested in. There is a code at the bottom of the screen to have um, 50% off for your gene testing. But how do you actually do that? Do you give them some type of herbs? Is it like a diet? What are we talking about?
Yeah, good question. We look at the interplay of genes, and so in the biochemistry realm, we look at, are they making dopamine? Are they making serotonin? Are they breaking it down? If you can't break down serotonin and dopamine, then it can cause ADD and anxiety and this intensity, this what we call sympathetic dominance.
Mhm.
That a lot of people live in, and that makes them susceptible to PTSD and trauma, because they're already at this level all the time, and then boom, you add a traumatic event to it, and then they're up here. But so what we do is we look at what specific genes, genetic variants do they have, what in combination, and then so the software program that I design will look at, okay, this is your gene set that you inherited, this is your best diet, according to these genes that you inherited, like you're better on a high protein or a low fat or a high fat or a vegan or vegetarian. And a lot of people have a lot of question about what's the best diet for me. And it's very individual. And that's the thing that we found was fascinating, is when we look at the genetic reports, we go, wow, it's never one size fits all. And then it also suggests supplementation. And so we have, when you sign up and you get your genes tested, the first step is compassion, because it's like, oh my gosh, this explains why I'm anxious all the time, or why I'm depressed all the time, or why I'm like that. Why you are the way you are is very empowering to kind of understand. It was incredibly compassion giving to me, because here I am blaming myself for not having a better attitude. Now, maybe I don't meditate enough. Maybe I don't do enough spiritual work. It wasn't the case. It was the underlying biochemistry that was holding me back.
Yeah.
And so then once you get that done, you get your diet and lifestyle report, you can start there. And then if you work with one of our practitioners, they'll give you your supplements that are designed by the software exactly for you. So it's not like you could take a multiple vitamin.
Mm-hmm.
The enzymes that you asked about, each particular enzyme has a cofactor or a coenzyme, and those are vitamins and minerals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're very specific and very precise when we say, okay, for you, you need higher zinc, you need lower selenium, you need higher B6, lower B12. We dial it in with very specific nutrients, and it seems rather simple, but it's very powerful. So for me, with the VDR variant that I talked about, the cofactors are vitamin K2 and A.
Mm-hmm. And
once I started taking those, then vitamin D could attach, and bam, all these things start to happen. So we have to look at, I don't encourage you to go out and take vitamin K2 and A, because now you're going to turn on the production of serotonin and dopamine. And if you can't break those down, you're going to create an anxiety. Mm-hmm. So we look at, once you create these neurotransmitters, can you break them down correctly? If not, then we add in this mineral down here to open up the pathway to let you break down that neurotransmitter. So we design the software does this. It designs your supplement program exactly for your genes to get them all balanced. And the cool thing is, people would come back in and they'd say, oh my gosh, like me, they would say, I think this is happy. I've heard about it, but I have never really felt it. Or they would say, this is calm. But the most often they would say, I just have this sense of contentment. Mm-hmm. And as you know, that's a great place to start a spiritual practice. That's what we're trying to get to, is that place of contentment. And if you can do it biochemically to start, just think what your spiritual practice would do, when you start there and taking it to the next level of spirituality. So it's kind of cool.
Have you noticed perhaps any common abnormalities or common factors that people tend to have as far as their mental health is concerned? And with that, is there almost like a common way that you help people, like a basic diet that somebody could follow?
No, that's the thing, is it's so individual, because, as I'm saying, like if you have that vitamin D receptor variant, the VDR variant, like I had, then, you take these nutrients. But I also have something called the MAO gene, which is the warrior gene. And it's, for people that have it, they're a little irritable, and so if you turn on that vitamin D receptor and get it cranking, then it could turn on your irritability if you didn't balance that at the same time. So there's no way for me to know, say, like, if you have irritability, take this, or if you have depression, take that, or if you have ADD. There isn't ever a one size fits all. It's looking at the whole kind of picture there, and that's just one pathway. Yeah. So we look at, the electron transport chain, which I'm sure you know what that is. It's, how we make energy. We start there, actually. And the Krebs cycle, how is that functioning? Are you making ATP, or the basic energy fuel that our body runs on? And then we look at the nitric oxide pathway. Are we making nitric oxide correctly? Are we breaking it down? And that's part of how we regulate our cardiovascular system, and how we fight off parasites and infections and stuff like that. So we regulate that second. So it's a actual sequence of events until we get to the end, where we turn on methylation and the body just starts to hum like a symphony, like we've turned on, it's the string check section, and now it's, all that. So you get the body going at 100%, rather than like all these deficits that you've inherited that kind of hold you back. Mm-hmm. Now we get them optimized, and the body can work at, its optimal level. And it's really fun. It's really fun to see that, because, as we age, we start to get creaky, and we get those disease risks that run in our family. And so you can prevent those things from happening. You can be proactive on what's coming, but you can also age, with a maximum energy, with maximum
Mm.
brain capacity, and with maximum, pleasure in your life. So
Yeah.
it's very cool when you get the body like dialed in correctly. So all of these genes, like you're familiar with sickle cell anemia, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That gene is a problem, if you inherit it, right? But it was actually beneficial to your ancestors or to their ancestors. It prevented malaria.
Yeah.
So those people that survive malaria, it's okay, they're alive, but now they have to deal with the sickle cell anemia kind of thing. But it kept them from getting malaria. So it's each gene that we've inherited is there for a reason. It's not a mistake. It's an adaptation. And so when we look at the genes, it isn't, like I say, a mistake. It's a variation from normal, and it was inherited for a reason. So the MAO gene that I was mentioning that makes us grouchy and irritable, you can imagine the warriors that like won the wars and, defeated their enemies. They had to be like aggressive and irritable and intense. Not very fun today because, if we're dealing with anger issues in our relationships, it sucks. And so sometimes it's just a matter of taking the right cofactor. Your brain calms down and you don't get into this, intense irritability. So it's kind of
Wow.
fun.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that as far as like gene expression and how it pretty much follows our history, our ancestral history throughout
Yeah.
time. And let's talk a little bit more about that in a second, but we're going to go on a quick break.
Okay. Cool stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, this is one of our pieces actually that we have on the site. But before we left, we were talking about gene expression and how basically they're not accidents. It was something that helped our ancestors at one point in time.
Yeah.
So my question is, and it's just what are your thoughts really, because it's more theoretical. What are your thoughts on being that the genes got expressed due to something that heightened our ancestors? Is it a way, or do you think that at some point we'll be able to turn those permanently off in our genes, probably down the line further in our ancestry or our descendants rather?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a classical geneticist, so I don't know the answer to that. But I know that, once you inherit your genes, your genes are your genes. They're not going to change in this iteration. But down the line, and especially with what we call methylation patterns, I'm sure you're familiar with that, where a methyl group is attached to a gene to basically turn it off.
Yeah.
You can pass those on to the next generation. And so it doesn't express. And so that's one of the ways also that we balance the human body is if you can't methylate correctly, and methylation takes B12 and folic acid, the active forms, you have to have those in order to methylate. Without proper methylation, your body is susceptible to cancers and heart disease and all the things that could, the genes that can turn on and express those kind of things. But those methylation patterns are passed down from generation to generation. And so it's really cool that, when a woman is pregnant and she's consuming the right diet and is in a calm state, and has proper methylation for her child, that trajectory is lifelong. That child will now have a much better chance of staying healthy throughout their life, and not getting cancer and heart disease. Those methyl groups are really powerful. And once they're placed on, a developing fetus, that changes their life forever. That's going to change. So for instance, we know that taking folic acid prevents neurotube defects, like spina bifida, et cetera. And women are told when they're pregnant, oh, take your folic acid. And that's why it's part of the methylation that happens that can turn off the expression of those birth defects. So we've known this. This isn't news, but specifically getting, the diet, getting this mother meditating, practicing, spiritual practices, staying really calm during their pregnancy, feeding themselves really healthy foods and making sure that their methylation is optimized is a huge gift to give to the next generation. And that does pass down then to the next one and the next one and the next one. So it's not like the gene is changing, but the methylation, the epigenetics has changed and it can stay in that state. So that's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was leaning towards because personally, and obviously there's no clear studies on this, but it's more of a personal thought. I do feel that if we start maybe in this lifetime and start healing ourselves, both spiritually, emotionally, physically, then we can not necessarily turn off or eliminate those gene expressions, but we can turn them off. So
Yeah.
that way, as we pass them on to our, descendants and to our children and so on and so forth, it just doesn't get expressed. And all of this starts now. You have to go in, or it would be beneficial for you just in your current life to go in and start taking care of yourself. But then you pass that health naturally on to
Mm-hmm.
your descendants.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like I say, it's a very special gift to give to the next generation. And it may seem like indulgent, but it is not. It is like hugely powerful for generation after generation down the line. You can inherit traumas from your ancestors through these methylation patterns. They did a study with mice where they subjected the mice to like a shock when they smelled a certain smell, like let's say lavender.
Mhm.
And so they learn to associate, trauma with that smell. It's that what is it? Operant conditioning, I think it's called.
Mhm.
And the next generation, though, did it without being exposed to that trauma. The minute they smelled lavender, they would go into a shock state. So, and then the next generation too. So, 3 generations down the line, without ever having been exposed to that trauma, that smell stimulated like a traumatic response in the bodies of these of their children and grandchildren.
Yeah,
So
that was exactly my next thing that I wanted to bring up was generational trauma,
yeah,
because generational trauma is a term that a lot of people might be familiar with nowadays, but don't necessarily know what it means. And that's what it is. It's something that happens so dramatic in your ancestry that it's stuck with you genetically and it's passed down to you. And now you might have a fear of like frogs for whatever reason.
yeah,
And don't know why you have a fear of frogs, but you do. But at some point in your past, in your ancestral past, perhaps one of your ancestors had something crazy that happened to them, and it just stuck. And now that fight or flight is permanently turned on
yeah.
from a perspective.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's fascinating. It may seem irrational, like why would I be afraid of frogs? But it's yeah, something happened where a frog jumped out, and
Yeah, and I always thought about frogs because my best friend is terrified of frogs.
oh,
And
yeah,
we would talk about it as kids, and she's like, I have no idea, don't know why, but she would just freak out. And I was like, that's crazy. But like for me, I've never really had a lot of the fears that I've had were mostly like fear of heights or fear of public speaking, which is so crazy. But you know,
why did you do a podcast?
right? It's so funny to me that I can do stuff like this now. Because before, oh, let me tell you, it's crazy. But and those are the things that I personally chose to work on. And when I started looking at some of my other behaviors, as we were talking earlier, such as anxiety, depression, I did look at some of my hormones, and I didn't go directly into gene expression. You know what? I did when I did gut health because I had really bad gut problems. So I started looking at some of the, not necessarily the genes, but the bacteria that were in my gut. And that's another thing that people can do.
Yeah,
But and I just started addressing it more of from a physical perspective, not just spiritually, because all spiritual things are connected.
yeah,
But physically, I wanted to clean up my diet, get healthier, and actively reduce the amount of stress in my life, so that way my cortisol levels was dropped. And I think it's so important to make sure that we're addressing all the areas of our lives. It's not just about the meditation because that doesn't it can be challenging for somebody to just sit down and meditate for the first time anyway. But we start beating ourselves up on why we aren't where we want to be spiritually, and don't look at our diets, or maybe we look at our diets but then don't exercise, or maybe we do those things but don't work on our psychology and our emotions. It's all encompassing for our overall health.
absolutely. It's all related. You can't ignore any one aspect of that. We're a hologram.
Exactly.
Yeah, this it's funny. The COMT gene is the one that breaks down adrenaline, and so if you have a genetic variant there in that enzyme, it's going to run slower than normal, and so you're going to get adrenaline building up. And those people are terrible meditators. They can't. They're like, "What time is it? Am I done? I got to go do laundry." They're like, "Like, am I done yet? Am I done yet?"
Right. It is so hard to focus, in the beginning. And I think that when you start looking at classical meditation and different focusing techniques, they don't particularly take into account some of the biological aspects that might be going on with you. And what they say is, just work at it. And if you work at it, then eventually, sure, maybe you'll get there. But this is just another avenue and another way to really help push that for yourself and not just for you, perhaps for generations down the line.
Yeah.
But we only have maybe about a minute or so left. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with?
No, just the aspect of the genetic compassion. I'm writing a book about that because we, as humans, it's kind of natural, but we judge people. Like, why can't they just be happy? Why can't they just calm down? Why can't they just quit being irritable? And understanding why you are the way you are, really getting your genes tested is incredibly powerful and compassion giving. So that's, like I say, that's the first place to start, is looking at why you are the way you are. So I encourage you to look at that and get that done. It's very enlightening.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Dunn. I really appreciate your time. And we'll have to do this again because I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. I want to talk to you more. I think there's more to the story that we could get into.
100%. And
Yeah.
thank you everyone for tuning in today. Have a great one. Bye.
Thank you, Dexter.